Take that mask off her face right now. HOA equipment isn't for freeloaders. The words sliced through the clinic's thin air before he could even answer. The woman's hand lunged forward, ripping the oxygen mask from the newborn's mouth as if she were entitled to every breath inside the room. The baby's chest tightened, her tiny ribs fighting for air. And while chaos flared, the man she thought was just a maintenance worker stepped forward with a calm she didn't expect. Calm sharpened by a past he never bragged about. She had no idea the moment she snatched that mask was the moment everything in this community would flip. Because the nobody standing in front of her had once carried dying soldiers across battlefields with nothing but grit and training. Before I take you to the exact second when she realized why he didn't wait for the police, you need to see the way this all began. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. This isn't a story about rules. It's about the consequences of crossing a parent who's already lost too much. He wasn't supposed to be here, not as a widowed father stumbling through single parenthood, not as a man repairing leaky pipes in the same neighborhood, where people treated him like part of the wallpaper. After the intro's chaos, his presence softens, revealing a quiet steadiness beneath the weight he carried. He adjusted Hannah's blanket with gentle fingers, every movement deliberate, controlled. Even now, after the near assault on his newborn, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. He just steadied her breathing, because keeping her alive mattered more than proving anything to a woman drunk on HOA authority. He'd taken this maintenance job because it kept him close to the community urgent care clinic, where Hannah needed frequent checkups. Premature birth had made every breath fragile, every hour uncertain. He carried an emergency pouch everywhere, a habit from years of stabilizing wounded teammates in places most people never imagined. The difference now was that the life he protected fit in the crook of his arm. Earlier that morning, he had walked into the clinic expecting a routine saturation check. The nurse on shift knew him by now, greeting him with a softness she rarely used in this sterile space. The place wasn't like a hospital, just a small neighborhood center built to please wealthy residents who liked having emergency resources without actually dealing with emergencies. That meant open doors, foot traffic, and HOA board members waltzing in whenever they wanted. A design flaw he'd come to tolerate until today. He remembered positioning the oxygen mask carefully over Hannah's tiny nose, whispering steady words so she wouldn't panic. She responded with small sighs, the kind that signaled relief. Everything was quiet, until the sharp click of expensive heels broke the room's calm rhythm. He had felt it before he saw her, that cold entitlement certain people wore like perfume. Marlene Briggs, the HOA vice president, walked in without knocking, throwing paperwork onto the counter as if she owned the building. She scanned the room, her gaze settling on him and the equipment he held with suspicion rather than concern. "Unauthorized use of HOA assets," she'd muttered, stepping closer, eyes narrowing at the oxygen tubing he'd brought from the clinic's supply shelf. He explained, it wasn't unauthorized. It was prescribed for his baby. It was logged on her chart. But authority doesn't need truth when entitlement feels threatened. And that's when she'd reached forward, ripped the mask from Hannah's face, and began inspecting it like evidence against him. The nurse's shout came too late. The baby's cry came too faint. His instinct came instantly. Now, standing in the same room moments after the snatching, he worked fast and silent. He reattached the backup tubing from his pouch, counted her breaths, stabilized her rhythm. Around him, voices rose, nurses arguing with Marlene, security radioing half-heartedly, and neighbors peeking in with equal parts curiosity and fear. But none of them saw what he felt. The slow burn of a man who knew what real emergencies looked like and knew this one didn't need permission or paperwork. It needed him. The uproar didn't matter. What mattered was the small life against his chest, clinging to every ounce of oxygen he could deliver. When the baby finally relaxed, he exhaled for the first time since the mask was taken. He didn't look at Marlene yet. He didn't need to. She was too busy insisting she was preventing misuse to realize she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. He lifted his daughter gently, turning away from the woman who'd nearly cost her a breath. Even then, he didn't snap at her. That wasn't who he was. The battles he'd fought in the silence of desert nights taught him that shouting didn't save lives. Precision did, restraint did, and when necessary, swift decisive action did. He only spoke when the nurse asked if Hannah was stable enough to move. His voice was low, steady, carrying the calm of someone who'd once dragged wounded brothers through enemy fire. Not everyone recognized that tone, but those who'd lived through war would have known it instantly. And while the room simmered with lingering tension, he walked out cradling his daughter, unaware that this moment wasn't the climax of their story. It was the spark, because the community wasn't done making assumptions about him, and neither was Marlene Briggs. What none of them realized yet was simple. The quiet man they dismissed had been trained to protect life under pressure no civilian authority could comprehend, and before long, the entire neighborhood would learn the cost of underestimating someone like him. He stepped out of the clinic's hallway, still holding his daughter close, unaware that half the waiting room had watched everything unfold through the glass panel. They didn't speak, but the shift in their eyes followed him, curiosity sharpening into something heavier. Maybe sympathy, maybe fear, maybe the first hint that the maintenance guy wasn't what he looked like. But he didn't slow down. He only focused on Hannah's breathing, counting the tiny pauses between each rise of her chest. The nurse hurried after him with a clipboard, still shaken by what Marlene had done. "She's stable," she whispered, "but you need to file a formal incident report." He only nodded. Arguments wouldn't help his daughter breathe. Paperwork could wait. He adjusted the strap of the emergency pouch across his shoulder and walked toward the clinic exit, hoping to take Hannah home before another round of HOA interference found him. Outside, the air was cooler. The walkway curved along manicured hedges, glowing lamps lining the path back toward the maintenance quarters. The community had always been proud of its luxury. Trimmed lawns, white stone fences, perfectly polished security booths. But to him, every decorative line was just another reminder of how people like Marlene saw the world. Neat, controlled, and divided. Laborers on one side, residents on the other, and people like him, caught somewhere in between, surviving without being fully seen. He shifted Hannah into a better position and leaned down to check her color again. She blinked up at him, her face softer now that her breathing had normalized. He whispered a small apology into her hair, because in his mind, everything that went wrong came back to him not getting her out of that room fast enough. It was irrational, but instinct always beat reason when you were a parent. Behind him, hurried footsteps echoed on the walkway. He turned, expecting the nurse again. But it was security. Two uniformed community guards approached, shoulders squared the way men stand when they want to look authoritative but aren't quite sure they are. One of them lifted his chin. "Sir, we need a statement. HOA protocol. The VP reported an aggression incident." Aggression. The word hit him harder than it should have. He didn't raise his voice earlier. He didn't touch her. He barely spoke. All he did was protect his daughter from a reckless grab. But the label still came, because people like Marlene never questioned whether they were right, and people like him were always expected to justify their existence. He kept his tone level. "My newborn's oxygen mask was forcibly removed. That's the incident." The guard hesitated, glancing at Hannah, suddenly unsure. "We heard different accounts." "Then look at her chart," he replied, voice steady but unshakable. "Or the clinic footage." Security exchanged looks. Their authority thinned with each passing second, but they tried again. "You should remain available for a more thorough inquiry." "I'm not leaving the community," he said simply. "I'm taking my daughter home." For a moment, it seemed like they wanted to push harder, but something in his eyes, something cold, trained, and absolutely immovable, forced them to take a single step back. The guard swallowed. "Fine, we'll update the report." He walked past them without another word. As he reached the maintenance wing, the world finally quieted. The quarters were nothing like the marble-floored residences across the community. They were small, plain, utilitarian spaces where workers passed through without lingering. He unlocked the door to his unit and stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of metal and laundry detergent. He laid Hannah in her crib, watching her chest rise with reassuring steadiness. It should have brought him peace, but peace was a luxury he hadn't felt in years. He stood there, hand on the crib rail, remembering the last time he'd watched someone fight for breath. Dust, smoke, sand ripping across an open field. The sound of incoming fire drowning everything. A teammate collapsing beside him. Another gasp. Another life depending on his hands. Back then, he didn't wait for medevac. He didn't wait for permission. He acted because seconds were currency and hesitation killed. The clinic today had felt too close, too familiar, too dangerous. He forced the memory away and focused on the present, on Hannah, on the promise he'd made when he buried his wife, that he would protect their daughter from everything the world threw at her, even if the threat came from someone wearing a pearl necklace and carrying a clipboard. He walked into the kitchenette, splashed cold water on his face, and steadied his breath. The victory strategy now wasn't violence or confrontation. It was exposure. Truth revealed to the right eyes, at the right moment, where entitlement couldn't hide behind polished fences. Someone knocked at his door, softly, hesitant. He opened it to find the clinic nurse, holding a sealed envelope. Her expression was careful, measured. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, "but you need it more than they need protection." Inside was a printed security log, time-stamped footage capture alerts. She had risked her job for this. "Thank you," he said quietly. Her eyes softened. "People talk about you like they know who you are, but today I saw something else." He didn't answer. He didn't want praise. He wanted truth to stand on its own feet. As she walked away, he closed the door and looked down at the envelope. This wasn't victory, but it was step one. Step one toward the moment when the woman who ripped the mask from his child's face would learn exactly who she'd underestimated. He stood in the quiet of the maintenance unit, the envelope resting on his palm like a thin, dangerous weight. It wasn't just paper, it was leverage, proof, a crack in the armor of a woman who believed her title made her untouchable, the kind of thing most residents would never risk handing over, but the nurse had, because she'd seen the truth in that room. And she knew how close his daughter came to losing breath. He set the envelope on the counter, resisting the urge to open it immediately. He needed to think clearly, not as a grieving widower or a father clinging to hope with bare hands, but as the man he used to be, the man who made decisions under fire, whose instincts were sharpened by necessity, not pride. Hannah stirred softly in her crib. He walked to her, checking her breathing again out of habit more than concern. Her chest rose with gentle rhythm, the oxygen levels steady. Relief nudged through his chest, but it didn't settle. Not when the real threat wasn't carbon dioxide or infection. It was a system that allowed someone like Marlene to rip a mask from a baby and walk away claiming she was preventing misuse. He brushed Hannah's hair back with 2 fingers. "You're safe," he whispered, even though the words felt temporary. Safety in Brookline Ridge came with conditions: obedience, silence, and the kind of social currency he didn't carry. That was the problem. That had always been the problem. A dull knock sounded at the door, not hurried, not aggressive, just 3 slow taps, spaced apart like someone unsure whether to proceed. He opened it, expecting the nurse again. Instead, the HOA community liaison stood on his doorstep. Jonas Price, a man whose suit never wrinkled and whose smile always looked slightly forced. He held a tablet tucked under his arm and cleared his throat with exaggerated politeness. "Evening," Jonas said. "I was asked to follow up regarding the earlier incident." He didn't step inside. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't even look at the crib. "What does the HOA want now?" the father asked, keeping his voice steady. Jonas's smile tightened. "It's protocol. We received conflicting statements, and we're obligated to document all perspectives before escalating to the board." The father didn't flinch, but inside, something cold settled deeper. "Conflicting statements," he repeated. "From whom?" "Well," Jonas shifted slightly, eyes focusing on a spot just over the father's shoulder. "Vice President Briggs reported that you reacted with hostility. She claims you became verbally aggressive." He almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief so sharp it felt like irony had teeth. Hostile? He'd kept his voice even while his daughter suffocated. He'd redirected his rage into action because survival didn't allow emotional indulgence. That wasn't hostility. That was discipline. "Did she mention ripping the oxygen mask off my newborn?" he asked. Jonas hesitated. "She described it differently." Of course she had. People like Marlene always describe things differently, through a lens polished by entitlement. "I have documentation," the father said, "footage logs." "From the clinic." Jonas's eyebrows lifted a fraction. Not enough to be a reaction, just enough to prove he hadn't expected resistance. The HOA security system will review the footage independently. It already has, the father replied. You're welcome to compare timestamps. For a brief moment, Jonas's expression cracked, revealing uncertainty buried beneath the polished exterior. A man who expected compliance wasn't equipped to handle calm, informed opposition. I'll note your statement, Jonas said quickly, recovering. But I do need to advise you to remain cooperative. These matters can become complicated. They already are, the father answered. Jonas nodded once, then stepped back. We'll be in touch. As the door clicked shut, the father exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the silence. Conflict wasn't new to him, but this conflict was different. In combat, the enemy was clear. Here, the enemy hid behind rules, signatures, and manufactured professionalism. The kind of battle where truth wasn't enough. You had to place it in the right hands, at the right moment, to make an impact. He opened the envelope finally. Inside were printed logs capturing the exact moment the clinic cameras flagged movement in the cubicle he occupied. The nurse had highlighted the frames showing Marlene entering, reaching, grabbing. No full video, but the timestamps alone created a timeline no one could rewrite without exposing their own manipulation. This was step 2 of the victory strategy, building undeniable evidence for public exposure. His stomach growled quietly, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. He fixed himself a quick meal, but barely tasted it. His mind kept circling back to the incident, replaying it with the precision of a man who once debriefed every mission with obsessive detail. Why had Marlene been so furious about the equipment? Why had she acted as if the mask belonged to her? Then he remembered overhearing residents complain about HOA budget audits, misallocated funds, missing inventory. Maybe she'd lashed out not because of him, but because she feared exposure of her own negligence. If that was true, the situation wasn't just about a wrongful accusation. It was bigger, deeper, messier. He tucked the logs into a folder and placed it at the back of a drawer, far from prying eyes. He wouldn't move too quickly. Rushing made people defensive and sloppy. He would wait, watch, prepare. As he checked on Hannah again, the hum of distant generators buzzed through the night air, a steady vibration he'd grown used to. Only tonight, something about the rhythm felt off. Too loud, too strained. He didn't know it yet, but that faint mechanical stutter would unravel the HOA's false sense of security and drag Marlene's world into a crisis no amount of authority could shield her from. Because neglect didn't stay hidden forever. And when the next emergency struck, the same man they dismissed as maintenance staff would be the only one capable of saving the person she loved most. The mechanical stutter in the distance didn't fade. If anything, it deepened into a low, uneven rumble that vibrated through the thin walls of the maintenance unit. He paused beside Hannah's crib, listening with the instinct of someone trained to recognize the difference between normal machinery and something developing into a problem. Generators were supposed to hum, steady, predictable. This sound carried strain, like it was being pushed beyond its limits. He stepped outside for a moment, leaving the door cracked so he could still hear Hannah. The night air was cool, the walkway empty except for the flicker of security lights. The generator behind the community center thumped again, louder this time. He made note of the timing, uneven intervals, pressure building. It was an engineer's oversight waiting to bloom into disaster. And in a neighborhood full of people who prided themselves on luxury while ignoring the labor that made it possible, he knew no one was monitoring the equipment as closely as they pretended. He returned inside, securing the lock, but unease coiled in the back of his mind. He had learned long ago that small sounds often signaled large consequences. You didn't ignore warning signs in combat. You didn't ignore them as a parent either. He sat at the table with the folder of evidence, spreading the papers across the surface. The highlighted timestamps formed a pattern, one that placed Marlene's actions squarely in the wrong. But he needed perfect sequencing, airtight logic, and a trail of facts that couldn't be twisted. He arranged the sheets carefully, building a chain that could withstand scrutiny once the truth went public. That was step 3, turn raw evidence into structured exposure. A faint creak of footsteps passed outside his door. He tensed for a second, then relaxed when he recognized the slower gait. It was the elderly resident from 2 units down, doing his usual late-night walk. No threat, just life continuing around him while his world tightened into a coil of preparation. He rose, checked Hana again, and began cleaning up the small mess from dinner. Muscle memory guided him. Rinse, stack, wipe. The routine steadied him. He had navigated far worse situations with far less certainty, but fatherhood had rewired him. The stakes felt heavier, the dangers felt closer. A soft vibration buzzed through the counter. His phone lit up with a notification. HOA Emergency Bulletin. He frowned and opened it. The message was brief, too brief to be reassuring. Community center experiencing minor power fluctuation. Facilities team notified. No resident intervention required. Minor. That was the word organizations used when they didn't want panic. He knew better. A generator that loud didn't produce minor fluctuations. He grabbed his toolkit, the one he used for pipe repairs and electrical checks. But inside it was something more important. Another habit from his past. A compact mask. Trauma shears. A slim field handkerchief folded into precise squares. None of it belonged to a maintenance worker. All of it belonged to the man he used to be. Before heading out, he leaned over Hana, adjusting her blanket. "I'll be back in a few minutes," he whispered. "I won't be far." He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. The generator's rumble had sharpened, turning irregular. He followed the sound across the lot toward the back entrance of the community center. Motion lights flickered on, revealing the side door slightly ajar. That alone was unusual. Facility staff always locked it after hours. Voices drifted from inside, young, scared. He stepped in cautiously. Inside the corridor, 3 teens stood clustered by the wall, one of them coughing hard enough to bend forward. The air smelled off, a metallic bite mixed with something sour. His attention sharpened instantly. Carbon monoxide had no odor, but the byproducts of a failing generator sometimes did. A tingling sensation hit the back of his throat. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice steady. One teen looked up, dazed. "We were cleaning from the volunteer shift." Then the lights kept flickering. Another pointed toward the activity hall. "Caleb went in to check the storage closet. He hasn't come back." Caleb, Marlene's son. Everything inside him shifted from concern to readiness. Lives didn't have hierarchy. A threat was a threat. "Get outside," he told the teens, ushering them toward the exit. "Fresh air, now." Once they were out, he held his breath and stepped deeper into the hall. The air thickened. He recognized the signs immediately. Dizziness, pressure, heat pooling in the chest. No alarms were blaring, which told him exactly what kind of negligent installation the HOA had approved. He moved fast, scanning the room until he spotted a collapsed shape near the storage door. Caleb lay on the floor, unmoving except for a faint twitch of his fingers. Pale skin, shallow breaths. Classic early-stage CO poisoning. He knelt, checked the teen's pulse, then lifted him with practiced technique. The boy was taller but light, his limbs slack. The father carried him toward the entrance, lungs tightening, vision darkening at the edges. He reached the door, exhaled hard, and shouted to the teens standing outside, "Call emergency services now." They rushed to comply. He laid Caleb in the open air, tilting his head, clearing his airway. The boy's breathing fluttered, irregular and weak. He dug into his pouch for the compact mask, designed for field injuries, not home emergencies, but it would do. He secured it over Caleb's mouth, feeding him steady oxygen through the improvised valve. It was the same technique he would have used on a wounded soldier pulled from a burning vehicle. His mind clicked into combat clarity. No panic, no hesitation, no noise, just steps. Caleb's breathing began to deepen. The teen stared, trembling, realizing the gravity of what had almost happened. He didn't stop until the boy stabilized, and he didn't realize they weren't alone until a shrill voice cracked through the night. "Caleb, what have you done to him?" Marlene rushed forward, hysteria overtaking entitlement. She dropped to her knees beside her son, looking up at the man she'd accused just hours earlier. And in her eyes, for the first time, there was no authority, only fear. Her scream cut through the night, high and brittle, cracking the fragile calm he'd fought to maintain. She reached for Caleb's shoulders, shaking him in panic until the father gently pushed her hands aside to keep the mask sealed over the boy's mouth. "Stop," he said quietly. "You'll worsen his airway." But she didn't hear him at first. Fear drowned out every other sound. Her son's limp body, the oxygen mask, the pale tint around his lips. None of it aligned with the version of reality she usually curated, the version where nothing bad could happen to people like her. When his steady hands didn't match her hysteria, she finally looked up at him. Really looked, and something shifted in her expression, a crack in the practiced veneer she wore like armor. For the first time since the clinic, she wasn't seeing the maintenance worker. She was seeing a man who knew exactly how to keep her child alive. What happened?" she asked, voice trembling. "Carbon monoxide," he answered without raising his tone. "From the generator. He's in early-stage exposure. He'll stabilize with oxygen until paramedics take over." Her hands shook as she hovered beside Caleb. She wasn't arguing now. She wasn't lecturing. She wasn't accusing. She was begging for a reality she couldn't control. A few residents had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion, whispering, pointing, phones raised. No one approached too closely. They watched from a cautious distance, unsure whether to interfere or stay silent. It was the same pattern every community fell into during emergencies, curiosity mixed with helplessness. The teens who had escaped earlier lingered near the walkway, one of them clutching a phone to his ear. "They're on their way," he said breathlessly. "The ambulance is coming." Good. They needed speed. CO poisoning didn't linger politely. The father checked Caleb's pulse again, noting its irregular cadence slowly stabilizing. He tilted the mask's valve to increase airflow. His movements were swift but controlled, an echo of the battlefield discipline that had lived inside him longer than his civilian life ever had. Marlene watched every motion with wide, panicked eyes. "He was just helping clean up," she whispered. "I told him to volunteer more. I thought—" Her voice broke. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "I thought it would be good for him." He didn't respond. It wasn't the moment to dissect her choices. The crisis wasn't done. He shifted Caleb into a better position, careful with the boy's spine. A soft groan escaped the teen's throat. His eyelids fluttered. The first sign he was fighting his way back. Marlene sobbed with relief, reaching for her son's hand. "Caleb, sweetheart, I'm here." The father kept monitoring the pulse. "He's responding," he said. "Don't move him until the paramedics take over." She nodded frantically. I won't touch him." It was strange to see her like this, stripped of the superiority that had fueled her earlier confrontation. Whatever she believed about herself or her title didn't matter now. The crisis had boiled her down to something raw and human. The ambulance sirens cut through the night, growing louder with each passing second. The residents stepped back, forming a loose path, as the vehicle stopped beside them, and the paramedics rushed out. They recognized the setup immediately. Oxygen mask, stabilized airway, repositioned limbs, and exchanged looks that acknowledged the skill behind what they were seeing. "Who's been treating him?" one paramedic asked. The father didn't answer, but the teens pointed at him instantly. "He did," one said. "He carried him out. He fixed his breathing." The lead paramedic crouched beside the boy, checked vitals, and nodded approvingly. "Perfect positioning. Pulse is recovering. You kept him from slipping deeper." He simply nodded back. Marlene's gaze flicked between the paramedic's praise and the man kneeling beside her son. Something in her tightened, gratitude twisted with disbelief. She whispered, nearly inaudible, How do you know all this?" He didn't look at her. "It's not my first time treating someone who can't breathe." The paramedics lifted Caleb onto the gurney. When they moved him, the boy's fingers twitched weakly around his mother's hand. She leaned close, whispering reassurances through tears. "Ma'am, you can ride with us," the paramedic said. "We'll monitor him on the way." She nodded, but before stepping into the ambulance, she turned back to the father. Something heavy, shame, fear, confusion, pulled at her features. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Thank you," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't know. I didn't understand." He gave a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't warmth. It was acknowledgement, nothing more. As the ambulance doors closed and the paramedics drove away, the crowd slowly dispersed. Whispers rippled through them, louder than they meant to be. "Did you see how he worked? That wasn't normal training. He saved that kid's life." But he's just maintenance staff. No one reacts like that unless... These murmurs mattered. In communities built on appearances, word of mouth traveled faster than truth. When the walkway finally emptied, he took a deep breath, grounding himself. His lungs burned faintly from the exposure he had endured inside the hall, but he'd felt worse on far darker nights. He started toward his living quarters, every step measured. The victory strategy had taken a new shape tonight. This wasn't just about exposing Marlene. This was about exposing the system she upheld. Her son survived because he happened to pass by, because training and instinct aligned, because he ignored every barrier society placed between their lives. Tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to ignore what happened. Not the board, not the residents, not the woman who ripped the mask from his newborn's face. Tonight changed everything. He walked back toward the maintenance wing with the deliberate pace of someone conserving what little strength he had left. The exposure inside the hall still clung to his lungs like residue, tight, unwelcome, familiar in the worst ways. He'd pushed himself harder than he intended, but Caleb had needed every second, and that was enough. The night was quiet again, almost eerily so, the kind of silence that settles after a crisis, but before the consequences show up to claim their place. Inside his unit, he paused at Hannah's crib. She was fast asleep, curled beneath her blanket, tiny breaths rising in steady rhythm. The panic of earlier had blurred into the background of everything else he'd done since, but seeing her now, peaceful and unharmed, pulled something tight in his chest. He brushed her cheek gently. She didn't stir. Good. She didn't need to see the fear he carried like a shadow. He sank onto the small couch, head tipping back against the wall. His body was exhausted, but his mind stayed sharp, replaying every detail. Caleb's collapse, the generator, the teen's fear, the paramedics' comments, and the look on Marlene's face when she realized who had saved her son. Not the maintenance worker she dismissed, not the man she accused of aggression, someone else entirely, someone she never should have crossed. Her words echoed faintly. I didn't understand, but he didn't cling to them. Regret born from crisis was fragile. It lasted only until comfort returned. He'd seen it too many times, people changing under pressure, only to revert once the fear subsided. A soft knock startled him from his thoughts. Late again. Always late when trouble followed. He opened the door to find one of the teens, Evan, the nervous one with glasses, standing on the step, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. Sir? I just wanted to, check on your baby, and also tell you something. He stepped aside. Come in. Evan walked in carefully, gaze immediately drawn to the sleeping infant. She looks okay, he whispered. She's all right, the father replied. What do you need to tell me? Evan swallowed hard, gathering courage. It's about the generator. Before everything happened, we heard the adults talking earlier today, some HOA people. They said the installation was rushed, cheap parts, something about passing inspections without actually inspecting. He hesitated. They said Marlene approved it because it saved money on the community budget. The father's jaw tightened. He didn't want to assume negligence without proof, but this lined up too neatly with the patterns he had already noticed. The shortcuts, the lies, the urgency to hide anything that threatened their curated image. Did you hear anything else? He asked. Evan nodded slowly. They said as long as no one complained, no one would know. That was enough to confirm it. This wasn't an accident. It was a consequence. Thank you for telling me, the father said, voice low. Evan shifted nervously again. People were talking after you left. They don't know your job anymore. Some said you looked like someone who, saved lives before, like you'd done this a lot. The father didn't respond. The teen continued. I think they're starting to realize they don't know who you really are. He didn't deny it. Get some rest, Evan. It's been a long night. Evan nodded and slipped out quietly, leaving the door to close with a soft click. The father stood still for a moment. Every part of him knew what came next. Not chaos, not confrontation, but scrutiny. Whispered questions turning into bold ones. Doubt creeping through the community like smoke. People who once dismissed him would now look at him with a different kind of curiosity. The kind that could pry doors open or slam them shut. Evidence, witnesses, community awareness. The victory strategy was unfolding exactly how it needed to. Public exposure not through force, but through undeniable truth. He walked to the table, pulling out the folder of clinic logs. He added a fresh sheet, notes about the generator malfunction, what he observed, the signs of CO buildup. He outlined it all with military precision, creating a timeline that linked the clinic incident to the broader pattern of HOA negligence. This wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability, safety, lives. As he wrote, another notification buzzed on his phone. This time, it wasn't an emergency bulletin. It was a community group chat message. Does anyone know what happened at the center? We saw ambulances. He saved that kid's life. Who? The maintenance guy. Not just maintenance. I heard he carried him out like it was nothing. He set the phone down. The dominoes were falling faster than expected. A sudden aggressive knock jolted him, not hesitant like Evans, sharp, impatient. He opened the door halfway, only to find Jonas from the HOA again, face tight with tension. "We need to talk," Jonas said. "Now." The father didn't move aside. "About what?" Jonas glanced around, nervously, lowering his voice. "Rumors are spreading. The board is concerned. They want statements, clarifications, control. And Vice President Briggs, she's requesting a private meeting." Of course she was. Fear brought humility. Humility brought negotiation. But he didn't budge. Not tonight. Jonas looked rattled. "You don't understand. This situation affects the entire HOA. "I understand perfectly," the father replied, "and I'll address it when I'm ready." Jonas swallowed hard, unsure how to handle someone who didn't fall in line. "Fine, but don't wait too long. Things are shifting quickly." He turned and walked off, shoulders tense. The father closed the door slowly, almost thoughtfully. Yes, things were shifting, and soon the same woman who had ripped the oxygen mask from his newborn's face would have to face the truth she tried so hard to bury. He closed the door behind Jonas, the faint echo lingering like a warning rather than a goodbye. The hallway fell silent again, leaving only the soft hum of the unit's old refrigerator and the steady breath of the sleeping newborn. He stood there for a long moment, hand resting on the doorknob, grounding himself in the simple truth that his daughter was safe, at least for tonight. Everything else could wait. But the weight of Jonas's urgency told him tomorrow would not be quiet. He walked back to the table and sat down, the folder of evidence still open. Pages spread like fragments of a truth no one wanted to confront. The clinic logs, the generator notes, his observations, Evans' account. It wasn't just proof of negligence anymore. This was a pattern, a structure built on cost-cutting and control, cracking under its own corruption. He knew this type of rot. He'd seen it in command posts overseas, the kind that always collapsed when pressure finally landed where it hurt. He inhaled slowly, letting the familiar discipline settle in. This wasn't a battlefield, but it required the same clarity. Gather intel, track weaknesses, anticipate fallout, and move decisively when the moment aligned. Victory wasn't a single strike. It was a sequence. Hannah stirred softly, and he rose immediately, walking to her crib. She blinked up at him with sleepy confusion, her tiny hand curling toward his shirt. He let her grip his finger, feeling the instinctive need she carried for comfort he fought hard to provide. He whispered quietly, "You're safe." He always said it, even on nights when he barely believed it himself. He picked her up and settled her against his chest, rocking gently as he paced the room. She relaxed almost instantly, breath warm against his collarbone. The rhythmic weight of her grounded him in a way nothing else could. While he walked, his mind traced every detail of the night. Caleb's collapse, Marlene's panic, the crowd's shifting perception, Jonas's rattled voice. It was the turning point of the story. They all knew. Something had changed. The community's illusion of control had cracked, and the only thing holding it together was the truth he now carried. He placed Hannah back in her crib once she fell asleep again. Then he sat down and opened the folder once more, adding a new section, witness accounts. He wrote out Evan's testimony, word for word, careful not to dramatize or assume. Accuracy mattered. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. Halfway through writing, he sensed movement outside, footsteps hesitating near his door, someone debating whether to knock. After a few seconds, the soft tap came, almost timid. He opened the door expecting another resident, or maybe Evan again. Instead, it was one of the teens who had fled the hall earlier, the girl who had been coughing the most. She held a water bottle in one hand and looked up at him with wide, cautious eyes. "Hi. Sorry to bother you," she began. "I just wanted to say thank you for helping us and for helping Caleb." He nodded once. "Are you feeling better?" She nodded, touching her chest lightly. "Yeah, they checked us at the hospital, said we were lucky someone got us out so fast." Her voice wavered. "If you hadn't been there—" He didn't let her finish. "You're safe now. That's what matters." She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. "People are talking, my parents, the neighbors. They said the HOA tried to blame the power issue on overuse. But my mom said she heard the board arguing earlier this week about failed inspections. Another piece of the puzzle, another thread of truth." "What did they say exactly?" he asked gently. "They said the generator wouldn't pass if a real inspection happened, so they didn't schedule one." He felt tension coil at the base of his spine, not anger, but resolve. Negligence was one thing, willful negligence was another. "Thank you for telling me," he said. She nodded, stepping back. "You're not like they say, you're different." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. As she left, he closed the door softly and returned to the table. He added her testimony to the growing stack. Now there were two witnesses, two teens whose accounts aligned, evidence that pointed not to a one-off mistake, but a structural failure engineered by those in charge. His phone buzzed again, this time with a private message in the community app. "We saw what you did. If you need statements, we'll give them." From Natalie, clinic nurse. That was 3 witnesses. He leaned back, hands clasped loosely, letting the realization sink in. The truth was spreading not because he forced it, but because it was undeniable. That was the heart of the victory strategy. Exposure through the weight of facts too heavy to ignore. As he organized the documents, another sound filled the night, the distant wail of a second ambulance heading toward the hospital. Not for a new crisis, for the aftermath, for accountability catching up at last. He stood, stretching the aches from his back, and walked to the window. Across the community, porch lights flicked on and off, shadows shifted, and whispers traveled from door to door. People weren't sleeping. They were wondering, who was he? How did he know what to do? Why did he act faster than anyone else? They didn't know the answer yet, but they would soon. He closed the blinds, turned back to the crib, and checked Hannah one last time before the lights dimmed. Tomorrow, the board would try to regain control. Tomorrow, Marlene would try to rewrite the narrative. Tomorrow, the truth would begin to surface. And tomorrow, he would be ready. Morning arrived quietly, but the silence felt nothing like peace. It carried weight, anticipation, tension, the hum of a community waking to a truth it couldn't hide anymore. He stood by the crib, watching Hannah stretch her tiny arms, her soft sighs filling the small room, like the only comfort left in a world slowly unraveling. He lifted her gently, pressing a kiss to her forehead, before settling her into the carrier on his chest. Today wasn't a day to leave her behind. Today, the HOA would try to reclaim their narrative. He secured the straps, grabbed the folder of evidence, and stepped outside. Sunlight spilled across the neatly trimmed lawns and polished sidewalks, the pristine view clashing sharply with everything that had happened the night before. Residents stood in small clusters near their mailboxes, whispers floating through the air in incomplete sentences. As soon as he passed, the conversations dipped, shifting into gazes that weren't dismissive anymore, but cautious, curious, a little shaken. He headed toward the community board office, not for confrontation, for clarity. If they wanted to meet, he would choose the moment and the terms. Halfway down the walkway, the clinic nurse, Natalie, hurried toward him, her eyes warm with concern. "Is Hannah okay?" she asked, peering at the baby. "She's fine," he said. "Thanks to you." Natalie nodded, then lowered her voice. "The board is scrambling. 3 emergency meetings since sunrise. Marlene is pushing a narrative that the generator malfunction was unforeseeable, but people are questioning everything." "Good," he replied. "They should." Natalie hesitated. "They also want to talk to you today. I'm not sure if it's genuine or if they're trying to contain things. He didn't need to think long. Containment, he said. They're losing control. She exhaled shakily. Just be careful. They'll twist anything they can. He nodded once. I know. Natalie left, but her presence lingered. Another piece of the growing network of witnesses prepared to stand beside the truth rather than behind the board. He continued toward the board office, but before he reached it, Jonas stepped into his path. The liaison looked exhausted, pale, torn between duty and fear of being on the wrong side of the unfolding chaos. We've been waiting for you, Jonas said quietly. They're all inside. I'm not walking into a room where they've already rewritten what happened, the father replied. Jonas swallowed. This isn't optional. It is, he said calmly. You don't dictate my schedule. Jonas glanced at the carrier on his chest, then at the folder in his hand. Realization flickered across his face. This man wasn't afraid of the board, nor the system they hid behind. All right, Jonas said slowly. Then, can we talk out here first, before you see them? He didn't answer, but didn't walk away either. Jonas lowered his voice. Last night, what happened with the power? It's bigger than anyone expected. The generator wasn't installed properly. Documents are coming to light. And the board, they're panicking because this could cost them everything. If negligence is proven, it will be, the father said. Jonas shut his eyes briefly, as if bracing for impact. Marlene is claiming you exaggerated the clinic incident. She says you're using her son's emergency as leverage. He felt the shift inside him, not anger, just a colder kind of resolve. Her son almost died, he said. I protected him. I protected the others. I didn't need leverage. That's not how she's presenting it. Then she hasn't learned anything. Jonas winced faintly. She wants a private conversation before the board addresses anything publicly. He shook his head. No closed rooms, no selective memory, no softened language. Residents walking by slowed their steps, listening without pretending not to. Jonas noticed the audience forming and paled further. Please, Jonas muttered, don't escalate this outside. They'll twist every word. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply shifted Hannah's carrier so she rested closer to his chest and said, I won't let this community hide what happened. Not to her, not to Caleb, not to any of the kids who were inside that hall. Jonas had no response, only dread. By the way, the father added, I'm making a report to county safety inspectors today, and I'm filing the clinic incident formally. Jonas inhaled sharply. The board will fight that. They can, he replied. I don't need them to approve it to do it. More residents gathered, more whispers, more shifting faces. This was exactly how public exposure began. Not with shouting, but with transparency the powerful couldn't contain. He walked past Jonas, heading toward the curb where his old sedan waited. As he buckled Hannah in, two neighbors approached, a couple who rarely acknowledged him before. Is it true? The husband asked quietly. Are you the one who saved the kids? He shut the car door gently. Yes. And the boy? The wife asked. Will he be okay? He'll recover, he said. Their relief was immediate. The wife's eyes softened. Whatever the HOA says, you did the right thing. Everyone knows it. The husband nodded firmly. If you need us to speak up, we will. He thanked them, then slid into the driver's seat. The folder rested on the passenger side, awaiting the next step. Before turning the key, he paused, looking at Hannah's reflection in the rearview mirror. She blinked at him sleepily. This is for you, he whispered. He drove toward the county building, knowing exactly what awaited him. Paperwork, scrutiny, pushback, and resistance from people who underestimated how far he'd go for his daughter and for the truth. But that never stopped him before. As the car rolled through the community gates, residents watched from porches and sidewalks, eyes following him with quiet wonder, uneasy respect, and dawning realization. The man they dismissed was becoming the man they needed. The drive to the county building felt longer than it was, the road stretching under the weight of what today would set in motion. Hannah slept quietly in the back seat, unaware of the pressure tightening across her father's shoulders. The folder sat on the passenger seat, evidence he never wanted to need, but could no longer ignore. He parked outside the pale stone building, its calm facade hiding the bureaucracy inside, and took a steady breath before unbuckling Hannah and lifting her into his arms. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to make sure no one could bury the truth again. Inside, the front desk clerk gave him a tired smile. "Can I help you?" "I need to file a safety violation report," he said. "Urgent." Her expression sharpened. "What happened?" He didn't dramatize. He didn't editorialize. He simply laid out the facts: the generator malfunction, the carbon monoxide exposure, the presence of miners, the lack of inspection. Her eyes widened more with each detail. When he handed her the documented timeline, her professional composure slipped into alarm. "This will go straight to investigations," she said, rising from her seat. "Stay here. Someone will speak with you immediately." He nodded, settling into a chair with Hannah cradled against him. She squirmed slightly, then relaxed, her small hand tucked against his chest. He pressed a soft kiss to her head, feeling both her fragility and her strength in that tiny heartbeat. She was the reason for all of this, the reason he stayed calm in chaos, the reason he didn't lash out at Marlene, the reason he carried truth instead of seeking revenge. A man in a county badge approached. "I'm Investigator Harris. You filed this report?" "I did." Harris skimmed through the pages, his brows knitting tighter by the second. "This is serious, very serious. You're telling me the HOA knowingly skipped inspections?" "I'm telling you something went wrong," the father replied evenly, "and the people responsible don't want to admit how much they knew." Harris nodded once. "We'll assign a field team today. This kind of exposure risk, especially involving minors, is non-negotiable." The father exhaled, not relief, but confirmation. The chain had begun. And once the county stepped in, the HOA couldn't hide behind polished fences and private security anymore. "Will you need additional statements?" he asked. Harris looked up. "Yes, every witness you can provide." "I can provide several," he said. "Teens who were exposed, the clinic nurse, possibly residents who saw the aftermath." "Good. The more accounts we gather, the stronger the case." He didn't stay long after that. There were no theatrics, no grand declarations, only a formal report, documented concerns, and a state investigator walking away with a folder full of evidence that the HOA had hoped no one would ever assemble. As he exited the building, the sun climbed higher, warming the sidewalk. Hannah blinked awake, stretching her fingers against his shirt. He smiled faintly at her, brushing her cheek. "We're going home," he murmured. But home wasn't quiet when he arrived. 3 HOA board members stood near the walkway outside his unit. Stern faces, crossed arms, the rigid posture of people who knew control was slipping through their fingers. Jonas stood among them, looking even more strained than he had earlier. Marlene wasn't there, but her absence didn't soften the intensity of the confrontation forming. One board member, a tall man with silvered hair, stepped forward. "We need to speak with you." He held Hannah closer. "I just got back from filing a county report, so unless you're here to acknowledge what happened, this conversation will be short." The silver-haired man stiffened. "You filed a report?" "Yes," he said simply. "But we told you we were handling this internally." "You weren't," he replied. A second board member, a woman with rigid posture, cut in sharply. "You're escalating a situation that could have been resolved with cooperation. Now you're dragging the county into private community matters." He studied her calmly. "A malfunctioning generator exposed miners to carbon monoxide. One of them was your vice president's son. That was never a private community matter." The woman recoiled slightly at the tone, controlled, factual, unshakable. "Your actions have consequences," the silver-haired man warned. "They should," he answered. Jonas cleared his throat, stepping forward. The board would like an opportunity to recalibrate the narrative before things get out of hand. "Out of hand?" he repeated quietly. "A child almost died." "That's not what we're disputing," Jonas said quickly. "But the optics—" He stopped Jonas with a steady look. "I don't care about optics. I care about truth." The residents watching from porches leaned closer, sensing a shift. The board saw it too, the weakening of their authority, the growing curiosity, the ripple of sympathy forming around the man they once dismissed. "Will you at least meet with Vice President Briggs?" the woman pressed. "She's—" "No," he said. The answer landed like a stone, firm, final. Not until the county completes its investigation, he added. The board members exchanged alarmed glances. Control was slipping faster than they planned. We urge you to reconsider, the silver-haired man said, for the stability of our community. He shook his head. The stability of the community was compromised the moment she pulled the oxygen mask from my newborn's face. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the watchers held their breath. The board members retreated without further argument, the realization settling into their expressions. They weren't dealing with a man they could intimidate or soften with carefully phrased apologies. They were dealing with a truth they couldn't manipulate. He stepped into his unit, closing the door behind him. The baby rested against him, warm and safe. For the first time since the crisis began, he allowed himself a breath of quiet pride, not for the confrontation, but for the path he was walking, deliberate, measured, unbreakable. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was moving, spreading, gaining momentum, and soon it would expose everything. He stood in the quiet of his unit for a long moment after closing the door, the weight of the confrontation lingering like static in the air. Hannah settled back into her crib, blinking sleepily before drifting off again. He watched her for a breath, letting her steady rhythm calm the storm gathering outside his walls. The board's panic, the community's whispered questions, the county's involvement. It all moved toward the inevitable collision he'd been preparing for since the oxygen mask was ripped from her face. He didn't want conflict. He never had. But conflict had found him anyway, the same way it found every soldier who didn't ask for war yet, walked into fire because someone had to. Now the battlefield looked different. Polished stone floors instead of dust, clipped hedges instead of rubble. But the stakes were the same. Protect the innocent and expose those who endangered them. His phone buzzed, a new message from Natalie. Paramedics confirmed CO exposure levels were dangerous. Caleb is stable but being monitored closely. His mother is shaken. Residents are beginning to ask questions. He typed a simple reply, "Thank you," then locked the phone. He didn't add anything else. There was nothing left to say. Not yet. A soft knock sounded again, gentle this time, almost unsure. He opened the door to find Raphael, the quiet middle-aged maintenance worker who rarely spoke more than a sentence at a time. He held a clipboard and a thermos. "Brought you some tea," Raphael said, simply. "Thought you might need it." The father accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." Raphael hesitated, then added, "You did good last night. The whole community's talking. Even the ones who pretend they aren't. I didn't do it to be talked about." "I know," Raphael said. "That's why it matters." He turned to leave, but paused at the walkway. "Be careful," he warned softly. "People with power fight hardest when they're losing it." Then he walked away, leaving the father with far more comfort than the tea itself. He closed the door and sat at the table, spreading the papers again, the logs, the testimonies, the report copies. Everything lined up. Everything made sense except for one thing. Marlene's silence. She hadn't contacted him since the night at the community center. No messages, no knocks, nothing. Guilt could freeze people, he knew that. So could shame. But silence after this kind of disaster usually meant something else. Strategy. She was regrouping, preparing a version of the story that placed her in the best possible light. He wouldn't let her rewrite it. A sudden chirp from the baby monitor jolted him. Hannah shifted, fussing lightly. He lifted her, swaying gently until she calmed again. She tucked her face into his chest, her small body melting against him. That tiny trust, so simple and complete, felt heavier than any evidence file he carried. He whispered, "I'll fix this, little one." He paced the room while holding her, letting the rhythm ground him. After a few minutes, she fell asleep again. He laid her down carefully, then checked the time. The county inspectors would likely arrive at the community center soon, and he intended to be there, not to interfere, but to ensure nothing accidentally vanished before they arrived. He grabbed his jacket, securing Hannah in the carrier on his chest. She barely stirred. He stepped outside, locking the door behind him. The walk to the community center was slower than usual. Residents turned to watch him, their expressions mixed, some respectful, some anxious, some unsure how to treat the man they once dismissed as background noise. He didn't react, didn't posture, didn't acknowledge the growing attention. He simply walked with purpose. When he reached the center, a county inspection van was already parked outside. 2 inspectors stood near the back entrance, speaking to a cluster of residents. One of the teens who had escaped the hall saw him and waved, relief washing across her face. "There he is!" she called. "He's the one who got us out." The inspectors turned toward him. "Sir," the lead inspector said, "we'd appreciate your first-hand account." He nodded. "I'll walk you through everything." Before he could begin, a sharp voice rang out from behind. "That won't be necessary." He turned slowly. Marlene stood at the walkway's entrance, dressed impeccably as always. But today, the Polish couldn't hide the cracks. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, her posture forced. She approached with the brittle confidence of someone pretending nothing had shattered. "I believe this situation is being blown out of proportion," she announced to the inspectors. "The generator malfunction was an unfortunate accident, but we're more than capable of handling this internally." The inspector frowned. "Ma'am, CO exposure is not an internal matter. Our presence is required by law." She ignored him and faced the father instead. "We need to speak privately." "No," he said calmly. Whispers spread through the onlookers. Not malicious whispers, curious ones. Her jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern the entire community." "It does," he replied, "because the entire community was put at risk." Her gaze flicked to the carrier on his chest, where Hannah slept peacefully, and something in her expression faltered. A brief crack, a flicker of regret, but it wasn't enough. "One of your board members admitted skipped inspections," he added, and teens overheard HOA staff discussing faulty installations. "This isn't going away." The inspectors stepped forward. "We need access to the generator room," one said. "Now." Marlene swallowed hard. "The key is inside." The father met her eyes, tone steady. "Then open it." For a long second, she didn't move, caught between her authority and the reality unraveling around her. Then, slowly, she turned and walked toward the side door, each step stripping away the confidence she had wielded like a weapon. The truth was gaining strength, and for the first time, she knew she couldn't outrun it. She walked toward the side door with slow, measured steps, each one exposing the cracks beneath her composure. The cluster of residents parted, watching silently as she reached into her blazer pocket with a shaking hand. The key jingled faintly against the metal handle before she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The inspectors stepped forward immediately, their flashlights cutting through the dim hall. He followed behind them, Hannah resting softly against his chest, her warm breath grounding him as the truth edged closer to daylight. Inside, the corridor smelled faintly burned, an acrid reminder of the generator's strain from the night before. The walls carried faint soot streaks near the baseboards. One inspector crouched beside the machine, examining the exterior casing with a deepening frown. "This wasn't a random malfunction," he said quietly. "This machine has been running beyond its recommended output for months." The other inspector moved toward the exhaust pipe. "Look at this. Improvised seals, off-market components. This is nowhere near code." He straightened, turning toward Marlene. "Who approved this installation?" Her voice cracked slightly. "The board signed off. I trusted the vendor." "No, licensed inspector would have cleared this," the inspector replied sharply. A murmur rippled through the hallway. Residents who had followed stood closer now, their eyes tightening, anger slowly forming beneath the shock. He remained still, saying nothing, simply watching as the structure of power that once overshadowed him began to crumble under its own negligence. The inspector continued. "Your cost-saving shortcuts nearly killed miners, and based on the county's regulations, this qualifies as criminal negligence." He pointed toward the exposed wiring. "This isn't oversight. This is deliberate avoidance." Marlene paled, her composure slipping like wet paint. I didn't know the extent." He stepped forward with Hannah still sleeping on his chest, his voice calm but unyielding. "You didn't check. You didn't verify. You didn't care until it affected someone you love." Her eyes flicked to him, something wounded flickering there, but fading quickly under the gravity of what she faced. The inspector turned to him. "Sir, your report was accurate. We'll need your full statement again once we complete the preliminary findings." He nodded. "Whatever you need?" Another resident raised her voice, trembling with anger. My daughter volunteers here every week. You put her life at risk. And my nephew, someone else added. And my son was in the hall with Caleb. The crowd pressed forward, no longer indifferent. The quiet suspicion that started last night had evolved into open outrage. For once, Marlene didn't respond. She couldn't. Her authority had dissolved, stripped bare in the presence of undeniable truth. The inspectors finished their initial sweep and stepped back. We'll be sealing this room for a full investigation, one said. We'll post emergency notices today, and the board will be contacted for formal hearings. Silence followed, heavy and unmoving. He turned toward the exit, adjusting Hannah's carrier gently. But, before he could take a step, Marlene rushed after him. Wait. He stopped, not turning immediately. She stood a few feet behind him, shoulders slumped, all traces of entitlement drained. When he finally faced her, she swallowed hard before speaking. Please don't walk away. I need to say something. The residents around them quieted but didn't leave. This wasn't private anymore. Last night, she began, voice trembling, I thought Caleb wouldn't wake up, and the only reason he did, her eyes filled, unable to meet his. The only reason he did is because you were there. He held her gaze without flinching. I wasn't trying to harm your daughter, she whispered. I was overwhelmed. I was under pressure. You grabbed the mask off a newborn, he said, his tone low, steady. Pressure doesn't justify that. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I know I crossed a line, and I can't undo what happened, but I'm sorry. She hugged her arms to her chest. Truly. He didn't let her apology shift the ground. Your apology doesn't fix the danger you created, for my daughter, for those teens, for your own son. She nodded shakily. I understand. And this investigation won't go away. I know that too. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by Hannah's soft breathing. For the first time, Marlene's posture wasn't defensive. It was fragile, cracked, stripped of the arrogance she wrapped around herself like shield. He didn't hate her. That wasn't who he was. But forgiveness wasn't instant, and trust wasn't something given freely, especially not after someone endangered the only family he had left. What happens next, he said quietly, isn't up to me. It's up to the truth. The words landed with the calm finality of someone who had already made peace with the path ahead. Residents nodded around him. Some murmured quiet agreements. Others simply watched, their own beliefs shifting. The inspectors sealed the door with caution tape and documented final notes before stepping outside. The crowd followed, dispersing slowly as the weight of the morning settled into their bones. He walked away with Hannah, feeling the shift in the air as clearly as he had felt the generator's stutter the night before. The community had recalibrated, not because of force, but because the truth had become impossible to deny. When he reached his unit again, he placed Hannah gently in her crib and allowed himself a rare moment to breathe. The hardest confrontation was over. The final resolution was coming. And for the first time since the oxygen mask ripped from his newborn's face, the outcome no longer felt uncertain. Morning light crept across the room, settling gently over Hannah as she slept. He stood by the crib for a long moment, letting the quiet reassure him. The chaos of the last 2 days felt distant, but not gone, like the echo of a storm that had passed, yet left the sky permanently changed. He touched Hannah's tiny hand, grounding himself in her steady breathing. She was safe, and soon this community would be too. A soft vibration buzzed on his phone, a message from Natalie. County officials returned. Final findings today. They want you present. He breathed out slowly. This was it, the last step, the moment the victory strategy reached its peak. Public exposure, undeniable truth, poetic justice. The board wouldn't be able to spin, hide, or soften anything today. Not with county officials leading the charge, and not with witnesses ready to speak. He dressed quietly, secured Hannah in her carrier against his chest, and stepped outside. The walkway buzzed with low voices, residents gathering in clusters, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Some nodded, some whispered, but none looked away. Word had spread faster than any newsletter the HOA ever sent. At the community center, 2 county vehicles were already parked outside. Yellow caution tape fluttered lightly in the breeze. Inspectors stood with clipboards, stern-faced, ready. The board members waited nearby, stiff and tense. Marlene stood apart from them, her expression hollow, hands clasped tightly in front of her. When he approached, the crowd instinctively made space for him. The lead inspector stepped forward. "We've completed the investigation. We'll be reading the findings for all residents present." A hush fell. He adjusted the carrier strap and listened. "The generator installation failed on all regulatory standards," the inspector announced. "There were no proper inspections. The components used were off-spec and unsafe. Responsibility falls on the HOA board leadership." A ripple of anger ran through the crowd. The inspector continued. "Furthermore, multiple witness accounts confirm residents had previously raised concerns about maintenance being rushed or ignored." He remained still, but his jaw tightened slightly. Everything he'd uncovered, the whispers, the evidence, the teen testimonies, now stood at the center of the community, undeniable. "And," the inspector added, "video logs from the clinic confirm an altercation involving Vice President Briggs and a resident's newborn, an incident which will be addressed separately with law enforcement." Silence struck like a falling stone. Marlene closed her eyes as if bracing for impact. Residents stared at her, disbelief shifting into outrage. Natalie stepped forward from the crowd. "He didn't exaggerate," she said, voice steady. "He acted to save his child, and last night, to save theirs." The inspector nodded. "Given the severity of these findings, immediate action will be taken. The generator area remains sealed. The board will undergo formal review and may be temporarily suspended pending hearings." Gasps rippled. The silver-haired board member tried to step forward, but the inspector raised a hand. "We will not be taking questions at this time." The father didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone, silent, calm, resolute, spoke for him. The inspector turned to him. "Thank you for your cooperation. Your timely report prevented further harm. If you hadn't intervened, this incident could have had catastrophic consequences." The crowd murmured, many glancing at the baby sleeping against his chest. Their recognition wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, genuine, and earned. When the officials moved away, residents drifted toward him, offering gratitude in halting words. "My daughter is safe because of you. You didn't have to risk yourself, but you did. If you ever need anything, you come to us." He nodded to each of them, humility lacing every response. He wasn't here for praise. He wasn't seeking validation. He was simply a father doing what he was trained to do, protect life, even when the danger came from the place least expected. Finally, Marlene approached him. She moved slowly, each step heavy with the weight of everything she'd ignored, denied, and justified. When she stood in front of him, she didn't try to hold on to her usual composure. "I know there's nothing I can say to undo what I did," she whispered. "No apology feels enough. But thank you for saving my son, and for not letting me hide from what I caused." He studied her carefully. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't pretending. She was facing truth, something many never learned to do. "You need to make it right," he said evenly. "Not for me, for the community you were responsible for." She nodded, tears balancing on the edge of her lashes. "I will, I promise." He believed she meant it, but he also knew promises needed accountability behind them. That part wasn't his job. That part belonged to the system now moving in motion. When he turned to leave, Hannah stirred, stretching softly. He brushed her head with his fingertips, feeling the calm of finality settle into his bones. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't retribution. This was balance, restored by truth, carried in steady hands. As he walked back home, the same community that once looked through him now looked to him, not as a worker, not as a stranger, but as the man who protected their children when their leaders failed. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?